And also, I'd like to welcome, also in Los Angeles, California, criminal defense attorney Lara Yeretsian. Thank you both for joining us. Lara, let me start with you in terms of just your overall thoughts, if you have any, as we wait for a verdict in this case.
It was an extremely interesting trial that basically had an entire nation, if not the entire world, watching and following, and everyone was interested and had opinions. And the one thing that I think this trial shows is that when someone comes forward, whether it be a domestic violence victim or a complaining witness, initially when the accusations are made, everyone believes, you know, it's got to be true. There's got to be some truth to it. But then you also see how a witness or a complaining witness, usually in a criminal setting is the way I've seen it, but here it was in a civil setting, could actually fall apart through great cross-examination. And then, you know, you start seeing attorneys poking holes in that story, impeaching the witness, and you start seeing that sometimes, even though a person or a story starts out very strong, during a trial, when we give it time and we listen to both sides and we keep an open mind, by the end of it, and especially by the time we hear the closing arguments, there could be issues, and that's what I saw in this case. And you know, when the case first started, we're all thinking, you know, Amber is making all these unbelievable allegations of domestic violence. And I think by the end of it, there were some real issues as to her credibility, and Johnny Depp's team had done an amazing job.
Tell me this, how important are jury instructions in general before we look at some of the specific ones before this jury?
They're extremely important. They are the roadmap for the jury. The jury are lay people. They don't know what the law is. They're not going to be able to apply. They need something, a roadmap, to apply the law to the facts that they've heard throughout the 7 weeks during the trial. So it's very important for them to have these jury instructions, and it's important for them to understand the jury instructions. And hence you had the situation here where they could not understand one of the jury instructions, and they weren't sure what the defamatory statement was, if it was the headline or if it was the entire op-ed. And you could hear the judge and the attorneys basically decide how to answer that question. So the jurors have a guideline in a way to follow, and they could make their decision accordingly.
Do you think that that jury instruction in and of itself, let me start with you, Lara, is easy to understand, or something that jury can grasp hold of?
I would hope so. I mean, the idea here is for them to understand that you don't just take a sentence out of context. You have to look at it as a whole and put it within the context it came in, and then decide if it was defamatory or not. And I think it's pretty clear, and I would hope that the jury in this case would understand it. If they don't understand it, we'll get a question for them, I'm sure.
Closing arguments. They are meant to be argued to convince the jury that your version of the facts is correct and rule in your favor. How important are closing arguments to a jury? Can their minds really be made up by the actual closing argument?
Possibly, yes, but I think closing arguments serve a different purpose as well. Sometimes jurors may have made up their minds, but they're not really sure how to go about convincing other jurors, or they don't know how to apply the law to the facts, or they can't remember all the facts. And the closing argument, a good closing argument, does that. And here we've got Camille Vasquez doing a superb job, kind of summarizing all the evidence that they'd heard over the 6 weeks of testimony. That's a lot of testimony. And also basically showing them all the weaknesses and the problems in Amber's story, you know, all the impeachments. And I remember during her closing, she had moments after she explained, for example, where there were issues and where she believed Amber Heard was lying. She would also show photos. For example, of her eye. One day she's got the bruise, the next day there's no bruise. And the audio, some of the audio that she was playing, those were very effective. So all of these, they tell the jury what Johnny Depp's, for example, team thinks and why they think they should rule in their favor. And hopefully, if there are for example, jurors who are on their side, they're going to hang on to those arguments and use them in that jury room. Yes, they are very, very helpful.
Let me ask you first, please. 9 hours of deliberation, a little more than that. The jury's excused for the day. Your thoughts?
I mean, 9 hours is a decent amount of time, but not enough for this kind of a case. I mean, again, we're talking about 6 weeks of testimony to go through, a number of causes of actions to decide, and it's not an easy one. They also, as my esteemed colleague Anima said earlier, they need to decide if they've met that burden on the malice, which is by clear and convincing evidence, and which is, I mean, the closest thing you can get to beyond a reasonable doubt standard. It's a pretty high standard. But at the same time, you know, they've got, I would think they probably would take another, at least a couple of days to get through everything and discuss everything. And hopefully they didn't vote, as we discussed earlier, from the onset, and they discussed everything and are discussing everything, and then they're going to take their vote. So I give them another couple days, maybe max 3 days. And if they can't come back with a verdict one way or the other, then I would start suspecting a mistrial here or a hung jury.